Episode 1 of our series The Last Taboo is with Emma Satchell and Esther Scholes, and it's called The Journey. Funeral celebrant and care home chaplain Reverend Emma Satchell loves to talk about dying, remembering our loved ones, and supporting people properly through this season. She's devoted to normalising the topic and raising the profile of death. Emma's recent training has been as an end-of-life planning facilitator, and you'll come to see that she is absolutely passionate about making the last months, weeks and days as calm and compassionate as they can be. Emma's best friend, Esther Scholes, lost her son Daniel in 2012. He was just 8, and her husband Richard died just 2 years later. Emma was with her through it all. Join best friends Emma and Esther as they share their journeys and chat with me about dying, death and grieving. In this episode, you'll hear the history of their friendship, how Emma discovered that she loves delivering eulogies, the experience of losing a husband and a son, and how to deal with different emotions in yourself and others, and how best to support a friend or acquaintance who is grieving. Right, hi everybody, we're here today with Esther and Emma. I'm really excited about this interview. We've all got up really early for this, so forgive people if they don't fully know what they're talking about just at this moment. I'm going to just do a couple of quite basic introductions, and then we'll get started with some questions. Okay, so I'm feeling very privileged to be here. Two women that I admire greatly. Esther is such a wise, thoughtful and compassionate person who loves building community and quietly getting alongside and supporting others. It just so happens that I actually find myself talking to your 20-year-old son more than I get to talk to you, because we seem to be at different services. And it's crazy that you've got a 20-year-old anyway. And he's great. But I'm looking forward to getting to know you better. And anyone who can whip a game of Pass the Pigs out of their handbag at a wedding reception is definitely my kind of person. That was a good game. That's Esther. Like many people over the world, I feel I know Esther after over many years, really, because before I met her, because we were all praying for her, praying for her family, and we followed her blog, which is called Full Hands Living in Plan D. Tragically, Esther's 8-year-old son Daniel passed away in 2012, and she lost her husband just 2 years later, Richard. So this is a really difficult blog to read, but I'm sure some of you will have already read sections of Esther's blog. And I'm just going to read out her profile because it kind of gives a background to her, to her family, and what kind of things she's into. So it reveals why so many tears have been shed reading and writing it. She writes, I write about a whole bunch of stuff I don't want to write about. The death of a husband, the death of a son, complex emotions that distort how we see life. Living with the disappointment of dreams that didn't work out. I also write about stuff I really like: faith, love, family, books, church, crazy days that have come from co-parenting 5 children and from single parenting 4. But most of all, about how awesome God is in any and every circumstance. Corinthians 12:9. And that verse reads, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. So thank you for joining us, Esther. I have to say, nothing prepared me for meeting Emma for the first time, which I did when I dropped my kids off at camp last summer. My goodness, as you'll see, she is a total whirlwind. She's so enthusiastic. She's got a heart of gold. And she is basically, as she told me, a second mum to many, many children at our church. She's often babysitting, often staying over with different families and kind of just doing what she needs to do with those kids and bringing them on and imparting a lot of good stuff into them. We'd kind of shared a potted history of our whole lives. Well, the suitcases and sleeping bags were being loaded into the cars, hadn't we? Found out we lived in the same part of Canada at one point and all sorts of things. So it was really nice to get to know her. And my eldest son came back from camp 5 days later, and he was singing the praises of this person called Satch, and I was thinking, well, who is this? Because I didn't know many people at the time. And then I quickly realised it was Emma. It was the person that the name you're affectionately known by. So we'd got to meet last summer, but it wasn't until I watched your Instagram live during the Death Awareness Week that I realised how much we needed to profile you here at Activate, because it was so inspiring. You were just so enthusiastic, talking about different things to consider when you're about to die, really excited about the kinds of things you could put in place. And it was just like, wow, Emma's actually talking about a topic that most of us don't really want to think about. And that's why we called the series The Last Taboo, because to me, we talk about all sorts of other things that we maybe don't really need to know about, or it's a bit too much information. But then the information we really need, helping our family, helping our relatives, helping our friends, helping ourselves to prepare for that everyone's going to go through. So it really helped me to listen to and watch that. So that's why we've come together. And Esther and Emma are best friends and have known each other for a very long time. So that's why Emma suggested getting you both on here today. So that's a little bit of a background, but thanks for joining us. And I'm so pleased we've got a bit of time to talk today. So Esther, I'm going to start with you. How long have you and Emma been friends, and what have you been through together? Big one to start.
We love talking about the beginning of our friendship, because 1999 was the year that Emma moved over to Preston and became a student at the University of Central Lancashire, where I was in my third year, Emma was in her first year. But we met each other at the church that we were going to, Fulwood Free Methodist. And I was a little bit bowled over by this girl who arrived with multiple colours in her hair, multiple colours on her shirt, and the loudest room-stopping laugh anybody had ever heard. I am very kind of reserved. I am like, think very carefully about everybody else in the room and how I come across and all this kind of thing, like a real introvert. And I don't know if you know that there's a phrase from Friends where it talks about Monica and how somebody tried to cut her out of their life, and they couldn't because she was scrappy, and so she made and we joke that Emma became my friend because she was scrappy. I was a bit like, ooh, not sure about this one. But, she kept turning up. She was there. We got involved in youth work together. I was in the process of getting married, and Emma was so enthusiastic about about the upcoming marriage. And God has just woven our lives together, from early morning prayer meetings where we used to get up at, silly o'clock to go meet at church to pray for the young people in the church. When I had my kids, Emma was first on the scene normally, and just brilliant. I've been through some periods of illness, particularly when I was pregnant, and Emma was just there, like, what do you want me to do? How do you want me to help? We've been on a mission trip together to Northern Ireland. We've been to multiple conferences together and shared rooms and that kind of thing. And because we've studied together again, haven't we? Because we both ended up at theological college at the same time. So when me and my husband were living there with our kids, Emma used to come and stay there for extended periods of time. And wherever we've moved, Emma's kind of like come there. And even though Emma now lives on the other side of the country, we see each other so often. We FaceTime a lot. I made a quick road trip a few weeks ago, didn't I, with two of my kids for the day. That was fun, because I think when you go through stuff in life that's really unexpected, as you mentioned, Rachel, we've had this, like, our family's been through these unexpected things, which haven't just been about the passing of my son and my husband, but the long process that both of them went through with their illnesses. You need people there who you can be completely unguarded with, just completely real, completely yourself. And that is certainly what Emma has brought into my life. You have different filters to me, don't you, Emma?
I'm not sure I have filters, that's the problem.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that might be it. And what Emma has really helped me to do is to kind of loosen my filters a little bit, to not try and always present myself in a certain way. She's probably the person I can be the most brutally honest with in my whole life. And so when you are going through moments where you're like, I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's going on. I'm really struggling with this. You know, yesterday this was happening and now today this is happening. You need people you can be totally real with. And Emma has always been that person for me. She has loved on my kids big style. My kids, we always used to joke about her being the third parent in the family. And she's been there at the right time. Like, she's known what those kids have needed, and has brought that sense of like fun and happiness, but also another safe place. Like, every parent, whether you're single parenting or whether you are parenting in marriage, you need other adults who are there on your kids' journeys, because I can bring the best wisdom to my kids. I mean, sometimes I do bring the best wisdom to my kids, but they're not going to listen because it's me, you know. Same old voice. And sometimes I don't bring the best wisdom to my kids because it's all tainted by the way that I want things to be. And to have friends like Emma, my kids have learned to be unguarded with her as well, and to be very honest, and that has been brilliant. So yeah, I would say first person I pick up the phone to, kind of person that is just there at the right time, and that is just probably a snippet of the stuff that we've been through.
So I think I'm the friend you didn't want and didn't know you needed. Isn't that right?
Baby, you said it, not me.
But I was determined I was going to be Esther's friend, so she didn't have a choice.
That should be your strapline under your Facebook profile. The friend you didn't know you need. The friend you didn't want, but you did need. Oh, lovely. That's a really great summary. Thank you. So, Emma, how did your experience supporting Esther through all of this lead you to discover your vocation in life?
Yeah, so my journey with Esther and her family awakened something in me that I didn't know was there. So as Esther said, Esther's kids are like my kids. So you mentioned Isaac, her eldest. He's my firstborn. I can walk into a room and I just shout firstborn, and he'll come running because he knows. He was the first of Esther was the first of my friends to have kids. So Isaac's my firstborn as well. And then when Daniel became poorly, we just journeyed together, didn't we, Esther? And it was a long period of Daniel going through different tests and different hospital appointments, and and different things. And at that point, I had just moved back to the northeast, kind of towards probably halfway through Daniel's illness, I think, as when I moved. And Esther was living in Morecambe at the time, and coming towards the end of Daniel's life, I was in Preston for a week, and I remember being in church and working with Esther's brother-in-law, and getting a phone call at church from Richard, Esther's husband, saying, "Is my brother there? I need him. I need to get to the hospital." And Esther was in Manchester at Manchester Children's Hospital with Daniel, and basically Richard had been told, you need to come, and Ed, who's our pastor, had said to me, he says, "You need to go with him. Esther's going to need you there as well." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So I jumped in the car, and three of us, so there's me, Richard, and Richard's brother, went over to Manchester. And I still hold this day as one of the best days of my life, because I got to just snuggle with my friend Daniel in a bed for most of the day. And he was a little tinker, I tell you, because his communication at that point was a bit more difficult to understand. And he was asking for things. And Esther and Richard had said, "Well, we're going to go off and get a coffee and stuff." And I was like, "That's fine. I'll just snuggle with Daniel." And he loved to watch Mr. Men. He couldn't see anymore, but he could hear. And so he would laugh along to the Mr. Men on the YouTube or on the tablet, or whatever he was watching it on. And then a nurse had come in, and I went, "I'm not sure what Daniel wants." And I was worried. And so the nurse was trying to communicate with Daniel, and he just burst out laughing. He didn't need anything. He didn't want anything. He was just winding me up. But I got a day that I spent with Daniel. And I remember saying to Esther when I first got there as well that morning, I said, "Have you told Daniel that it's okay for him to go?" And Esther said, she says, "Yeah, we've talked. And I've said to Daniel, if you need to go and be with Jesus, we'll be okay." And for me, that's a huge thing, and that's something that I've, working with people who are dying, sometimes giving them permission is really big. So I had that day, and I got to say my goodbyes to Daniel, and he lasted another week. And Daniel got to see all the people he wanted to see. So his auntie and uncle were on mission in Africa at the time. They came back. Friends from Bible college came. He got to see everybody he wanted to see, and he died a week later. And I was in the Northeast at that point. I was actually in Asda, doing some Asda shopping with my dad, and I just got them like a text message to say that Daniel had gone. And I just remember going and finding my dad in Asda saying, I need to go. So we just abandoned our supermarket shopping, came home, I packed a bag, and I drove down to Preston, because Esther and the family were living with family at that point in Preston. And I just turned up and I said, what do you need? And I think I bought a massive box of tea bags with me, because I was like, tea is good for everything, and you can't fix this situation, but I can make tea, you know. So I turned up with a big box of tea bags, and I was just there with the kids, and then throughout that week, as funeral plans were being made, I was just around in general. And it was about 2 days, I think, before the funeral, Richard said to me, Emma, I don't think I can do Daniel's eulogy. Would you do Daniel's eulogy? And I was like, oh my word, that is the biggest honor ever. Yeah. And I had about 2 days, and I was like, I remember sitting in Starbucks with my laptop and just writing about my friend Daniel. Because that's what he was. He was an 8-year-old, but he was my friend. And you know, just some of the amazing memories that I had with Daniel, and being that little bit distanced, not being his actual parent, but being his third parent and friend, I was able to just tell Daniel's story. So the day of the funeral came, and it was really nice. So Daniel had a family funeral in a small chapel, and then we had a big celebration service at Fulwood Free Methodist Church, and it was packed. So I got to deliver Daniel's eulogy twice. And I was just so proud to talk about my friend Daniel. And then afterwards, people kept telling me how good it was. Now, I love a bit of praise, don't you know, that is grand. And it is one of my love languages, affirmation. But a couple of people said to me, you should do funerals. And it had never crossed my mind. I'd spoken at grandparents' funerals and things like that. But other than that, it had never crossed my mind. But it planted a seed, because I just thought, this is an amazing gift. To be asked to be part of someone's funeral is an honor. And then it's the last thing that we can do for someone. And when we're taking part in a funeral, we're honoring that person who has died, we're celebrating their life, but we're supporting that family in a really unique way. So that kind of just stayed with me, and I didn't do much about it, because actually the funeral industry is quite difficult to get into if you haven't got contacts. And but it was something that was in the back of my mind. Yes, I'd like to do that. And then obviously we then journeyed the next 2 years with Richard becoming ill, and Richard being adamant that he was not going to die because he had too many things to do. And
how would the world keep evolving without Richard here? That was
I know, it's but it's true. And I think none of us could understand, you know, like how can things happen without Richard? Richard was a person who made things happen, you know. And I didn't spend as much time with Richard towards the end of his life. He went into a hospice in Lancaster, and I was here. But the February before Richard died, in the May, Esther and the kids and Richard came to visit me here in the Northeast. I had a day with them here, and that was a surprise.
It was, and it was when we got the news that the treatment that he was having, he wasn't going to be able to go ahead with the bone marrow treatment, and we knew that there wasn't going to be time, and it was one of those no-brainers of like, if we need a bit of family time together and to break away, who do we want to go and see? So we're like, let's road trip across the country to South Shields.
Yeah, and that was it. It was like, and I didn't know. So Esther had been in touch with my mum. Is Emma going to be home this day? Is she, you know, or whatever? And I was just working from home, and and so my mum's like, oh, you need to stay in today, or like there's a delivery coming or something. And so I'm just at home, and then the Scholes mobile turns up, and like, because they had a massive bus, right? So the Scholes mobile turns up at my house, and I'm like, oh my goodness. So honestly, it was best, like I would say, alongside that day I had with Daniel, the visit of the Scholes mobile as a surprise was one of the best days of my life. Yeah, and then that was the last time I saw Richard, was the February. And then obviously we FaceTimed and we chatted on the phone and things, and journeyed that the rest of that time of Richard's life. And then Esther, do you remember we had a prayer group that like surrounding you, particularly and leading up to Richard's funeral, and we were bouncers for Esther at Richard's funeral, because you know, everybody wants to talk to you when it's your husband's funeral. You know, everybody's got something to say, but there was a small group of us who were who kind of basically just protected Esther on that day as well. And Richard loved Duck Dynasty, so he loved his camo, didn't he? So I'd made us all camouflage rosettes, like badges, so that you know, we were like Team Richard, and we had our camouflage rosettes on. And one of the things that really stands out to me from Richard's funeral was, well, for both of them, was the floral arrangement that you had, Esther. So for Daniel's funeral, they had a Mr. Happy floral arrangement, and for Richard's funeral, they had a massive beard, because he had a big bushy beard. So they had a floral arrangement of a beard, and I just remember thinking, this is how funerals should be done, like reflecting the person. And again, and Daniel had a yellow coffin because that was his favorite color, and Richard had his camel coffin, didn't he? And it's like, these are things that reflect that person. So again, it was just this journeying of people through, and journeying with families through that time, and it just kind of lodged there in my head. And then I was working back up in the northeast, and I was working in a contact centre at the time, and I went on and started my work as a chaplain in a care home, and then a chaplain in a hospice as well. And then my nana died, and my nana was like the linchpin of our family. She was the matriarch. But because I'd already decided I wanted to do funerals, when it came up, like when my nana was like, actually, we were told my nana had 6 weeks to live, and she died 4 years later. So I'd done some of the pre-planning beforehand. But then when she died, I just went into, I'm doing this mode. I'm doing this, you know. And so my nana's was the first full funeral that I took, and I just contacted a local funeral director, and I worked with him, and then I was like, you know, I want to lead this. Family didn't pay me. I had to do that for free. I mean, I'm not quite sure how that worked, but but no, and that was amazing, because I was like, I don't actually trust anybody else to do my nana's funeral. Now that I know that I can do it, I want to do this. And so yeah, that's kind of through Esther's journey, and my journey with Esther kind of took me through to that element of actually starting to lead funerals. Something I never thought I would do, you know.
Well, better you than me, because I was just blubbing then, and I've never even met Rich and Daniel, so I'm terrible at other people's funerals. Okay, thank you. Right, next bit, can you tell us a bit about your current roles and give a brief rundown of a typical day in your life? Because you've done this before on Instagram, just sort of like kind of things you get up to, what a funeral involves, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So I currently have a number of jobs. I get bored. So I'm employed 10 hours a week by a company called MHA, Methodist Homes for the Aged. 10 hours a week for them as a chaplain in a care home in Cramlington in Northumberland. It's a 35-bed care home, a mix of residential and dementia, and I love it. And then I'm also employed 12 hours a week as an area support chaplain. So I kind of cover from the Scottish borders and down to Hull and out to Harrogate. But my care home in Cramlington's the most northerly one, so I don't tend to have to go much further north than that. Then I've got my business, which is called Dying to Help. And when I set up the business, that's my funeral business as an independent funeral celebrant. And when I set that up, I was working, like I say, I had a year where I worked on the chaplaincy team at a hospice as well. I was coming to the end of that year. I had done my nana's funeral in that year. And I said, right, I want to do this. And I remember talking to a few people at the hospice, a few members of staff, and I was like, I really want to call the business Dying to Help. What do you think? And one or two of them were like, oh no, that's too in your face. And everybody else was like, that is brilliant, because if they don't like that name, they're not going to like you. And they're not going to use you. And that was it. It's like, you know, it's out there. So yes, my business is called Dying to Help. So I was, for a number of years, I've worked as an independent funeral celebrant. What that means is that I can offer non-religious funeral services. I can offer you a blended funeral service, and because I am an ordained minister in the Free Methodist Church, I can offer you a full Christian service as well. But the vast majority of my work is non-religious or blended. So what that means is like maybe a non-religious service, but they do maybe want a prayer in there, or they might want the 23rd Psalm or something like that. So we can bring some elements in, but they're like, we don't want it just to be all religion. We want it to be about mum. And to be honest, even when I do a fully religious service, it tends to be about mum. And you know, and that's what I think the focus should be. That's not for everybody, and I'm not for everybody. We've already established that. So you know, so yeah, so I work with funeral directors.
Love you.
Sorry, what was that?
So give them long enough though, and they discover that they love you. You just don't have several weeks with each family, that's all.
No, this is true. But the way that I work is I get referrals from funeral directors. So a funeral director, a family will come along and meet a funeral director and choose to use that funeral director. And then the funeral director matches the family with the minister or celebrant. And so there's one funeral director I work with quite a lot, an organisation called Go As You Please. So again, you know, like you're not going to use them if you don't want to go as you please. And so I work a lot with them, and they match me with people who are going to fit my personality, what I can bring. I've always said there's very little I won't do at a funeral. So if a family wanted me to do a funeral dressed in a Tigger onesie, I would do a funeral dressed in a Tigger onesie if that's important. I have done a funeral dressed as Elvis. So it was a gentleman from our care home. He had no family, no next of kin. He was a huge Elvis fan. And when it, you know, we talked about, one of my jobs as a chaplain is to talk about final wishes, how people would like to be cared for towards the end of their life, and funeral wishes and things like that. And he just kept talking about how much he loved Elvis. So we organised his funeral. He had an Elvis printed coffin, and I did his funeral dressed as Elvis. But yeah, there's a couple of things I won't do. So if it's anything that goes against my faith, so if they're wanting elements of other faith in there, I can't do that. And that's fair enough. And most people are like, yeah, that's fine. And I'm a Sunderland supporter, so I find it really, really difficult if they ask me to wear a Newcastle shirt. And I've had some families who I've done multiple funerals for. And one family, we'd had some banter about this, and I'd done the mum's funeral, and then her son died like less than a year later, and the brother of the son, when I was talking to him, he said, well, you know, my brother always said he wanted the funeral celebrant to wear a Newcastle shirt. And I was like, oh, because I'm going to have to do it because I know the family. And then they all burst out laughing, and they were like, we're only joking. So there's very little I won't do, because for me, it's about what's important to that family. And one of the questions I ask a family when I go and visit them is, you know, did the person have a favorite color or something like that? Because if they did, I'll wear that. Or is there something specific? I very rarely wear black for a funeral, again, unless I'm asked to. And it just adds that element of making it personal, you know. So for Daniel's funeral, we all wore a splash of yellow, you know, and it's picking something out that makes it personal. So funeral directors match us up. So then I'll get a phone call from a funeral director. Are you available on this date? Yes or no. And then if I am, I get the family's details. I give them a call. I introduce myself, and then I arrange to go and visit them. I send out an email to them with a whole bunch of questions, which when I was putting it together, I ran to Esther, and I was like, and I started doing this during COVID because I couldn't go and visit families. So I had to send things out via email. So I put this list of questions together and I sent it to Esther, and she was like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. She said, because if we'd had this when Daniel had died, it would have made things so much easier. The funeral director just kept saying, you can have anything you want. You can have anything you want. But if you don't know what the parameters are, you don't know what you can have. So I send out an email that runs through a general flow of an order of service. And I always say we can do anything. We've got 20, normally it's in a crematorium chapel. We've got 20 minutes. We can do whatever we want. And then I ask a load of questions about the person. So the family get that, and then I'll go and visit them later in the week, and we'll chat through. And what I've found is since using that email, visits are so much easier, because often you'd go and people are just stuck. because they're in that state of grief, and you're asking questions about this person so that I can go away and build the eulogy, which I don't call a eulogy in my services. I call it the remembering. So, you know, remembering Daniel or remembering Richard, because again, there's just weird words that we use, you know, that people don't understand. So we just remember. But yeah, you can get stuck if you've not got those prompts beforehand, if you've not been asked to think of some stories or to think about these things. So yeah, then I get all that information, I come home and I get to write someone's story, and that's amazing. So I gather all that information, I write that up together. I'll ask families if they want any readings or poems, and I can direct them to some resources for those or suggest some. And then I put that whole service together and I send that back to the family to check, because it might be that I've got a date wrong, or I've used some wording that they don't like, or whatever. But so they'll come back with, and then that's sorted. The day of a funeral, I make sure, well, the day before, I'll check everything. So which crematorium I need to be at, because I work at quite a few, what time the service is, what colour I'm supposed to be wearing, have I got the service printed out, if I'm doing copies for the family to keep afterwards, have I got all those sorted. So that's the day before. Day of the funeral, make sure I know where I'm going, head off over there. Again, normally I'll wash my hair that morning. You've got to look nice, you know, so it's planning these things in. So make sure I'm all smart, everything. Turn up at the funeral, normally 15 minutes early. I go in the back of the crematorium, have a chat with the guys there, make sure all the music's right, everything's sorted, and then I'm there ready to greet the family when they come in. And then we lead through that funeral service, and then I never leave before a family leaves. Some people, I know a number of celebrants who do multiple services in a day, and they'll do a service and dash, and I can't do that. That's just not me. So I'll just hang around afterwards until the family have gone. Often they'll invite me back if they're having a wake somewhere, and depending on how that fits in my day, I'll go or not. It really depends. And then that's done. And that's my work with that family, normally completed at that point. So that's funerals. But there are like a whole bunch of other stuff that I am building into my work at the moment. But I think we're going to come on to that a bit later, aren't we? So yes. we'll hold thoughts on that. But yeah, and because I could do anything between no funerals in a week and my maximum is 3. I won't do more than 3 in a week, and I'll never do more than 2 in one day. I don't like to do multiples in a day if I can help it, because I've got my other job, and I want to make sure that when I'm telling someone's story, I'm not mixing up Brenda and Betty. You know, I need to make sure I'm holding that person and that family in honor, and that, you know, they're getting the best of what I can bring. So yeah, it can be, it just depends what work comes through, but it's great.
Sounds good. That's good. Okay, Esther, I'm just going to come back to you for a minute, if you don't mind. Now, I'm sure I'm not alone in finding it hard to know what to say when a friend is bereaved, or what to write in the card, how to act at the funeral. Can you share any words of wisdom from your experience? What is it good to say? What do you not say? And how to help people?
Yeah, this is a great question, isn't it? Because when you lose somebody that's close to you, the whole world looks different. Like, you know, if it's a parent, if it's a spouse, if it's a child, it might be a close family member that for other people they might go, oh yeah, I lost my grandma when I was 6, but their relationship with their grandma might be really different to your relationship with your grandma, and what your week looked like when you had your grandma in it, and that kind of thing. So it's so specific to you. But it's also more than just the loss of that person. It's very often a loss of like stability, or loss of identity. You know, to go from a married person to a single person was a really big jump. It's a loss of that routine. Like in our case, our world had been caught up with being at the hospice, being up and down the motorway, and it all happens at once. So even if you've had, whether it's a sudden death, or whether there's been months and months, you know, in a diagnosis, and so therefore technically you think, oh well, it shouldn't be a shock, but that actually doesn't matter. Your body still goes into shock when you lose the person, and in a way, if there has been a long illness in the lead up to it, your whole world has revolved around it. And that's one of the things I really remember, particularly after Richard's death, was everything had been about him and making sure that he was okay, and trying to, you know, run the family. When do the kids see him? When do I need time on my own with the kids? All that kind of thing. And I remember the moment that he died, that the room had lots and lots of staff from the hospice in, and everybody's eyes turned to me. And suddenly it was like, oh my goodness, this was all about him, and now it's all about me. And that in itself is a very overwhelming thing. We're all different personality types, but I'm one of these. I like to really carefully sort of manage or think about the expectations of the people around me. You know, like, how are they feeling? What are they thinking? So one of the things I found overwhelming about being in this pit of grief was you've got all these other people who are grieving, who are in shock, even if they didn't know you very well. It's a shock to them. You know, this person, I knew about this person, and now they're not here anymore. And I had to be really careful to go, it's not my job to manage everybody else's emotions right now. It's not my job to manage their reactions or their feelings or whatever their feelings are tied up in. You know, some people that barely knew these members of our family, but they may have lost members of their own family a while ago, and this would bring up the same kind of emotions. So that sense of like, giving people space to feel what they're feeling, but also putting a boundary in place that says, I need to be careful to feel what I need to feel right now. Now, there are definitely times of numbness, and where, you know, our bodies and our brains are marvelous things, and they will protect us from feeling everything all at once. So there is an appropriate amount of numbness that comes, and over the next few months you feel different things at the right time for you, which is why some people have said it was harder 3 months on or 6 months on than it was in the first couple of weeks, because in the first couple of weeks you have this self-protective thing. So I remember at times feeling like everybody else is really emotional and I'm not. Is that okay? And yes, it was okay. And so, as if you're someone that's coming to approach someone who's just lost somebody, I think it's that willingness to sit with them if they are in absolute turmoil, if there's buckets and buckets of tears, because some days that's what that was like, and to be comfortable with that and not to try and do anything to stop them from crying. And it's also got to be okay that if you turn up and on that day they don't really want to cry, they don't really want to wallow in it, but they might say something like, you know, can we just go out? I just need to leave the house today. I need to go and do this. Of saying, yes, absolutely, let's go and do that. And being willing to sit with both. There were moments with you and me, Emma, that week after Daniel died, because as you say, we were staying at my uncle and auntie's house, and they've got like big wide open spaces. And in my memory, 2012 was wet, grey, dreary up until May the 21st, which is the day that Daniel died. And it was like the heavens just flipped over, maybe in celebration of him being up there, I don't know. And the skies were blue for the next 2 weeks. It was the most glorious sunshine. So we were outside with our kids. The kids were in the pool. The kids were like on this tennis court. And do you remember, Emma, there was an afternoon we were playing swing ball. Maybe 3 days after Daniel had died, playing swing ball with each other. I remember laughing so hard that I was bent over double, but also looking at myself thinking, is this okay? Like, my son's just died on Monday, and here I am on Thursday crying with laughter because we're playing swing ball. Now, would I have done that with anybody else? Probably not. This is why Emma has a very special place in my life. But also there was this pent up emotion that had been there for months and months and months. And in that time, because there's so much numbness in the beginning, if you can feel anything, if you can feel deep grief, allow yourself to go there. If you can feel deep joy, I think there's a lot of joy when you lose someone and everybody gathers to talk about what that person meant to them. Allow yourself to feel that joy, even if it feels a bit odd in the moment, because that was the most important thing. And it was really important for me that my other kids, who, you know, Daniel was the whole entire world. They didn't remember a day where he hadn't been part of our family, for them to see the joy and the laughter and the friendships, the people that gathered around in that time. So if you are close to somebody, if you already have that place in their lives, I would absolutely say ride the roller coaster with them. Be up, be down, be all around. Just say, what do you need today? I'm not going to judge. Just what do you need? Do you want to go shopping for a new item of clothing so that you can experience what it's like when you've had such an interruption in your life, when nothing looks like it's ever going to be the same again, to go and choose something new to bring into your life, which kind of feels like it should be over, but it's not. You know what I mean? Or if that person wants to sit for a month and not do anything, then make them a meal, bring that meal around, because we all deal with these things differently. And if you're that person that is alongside them in that time, then you're going to be that person alongside them in 3 months' time and in 6 months' time, where the waves come differently, where the experiences are different, and just keep walking with them. So that's advice for if you're close to that person. If you don't know that person very well, this is an interesting one. I'm blessed with a really big wider family and a really big wider church family. I've always been part of the Free Methodist Church, so I've known people all my life. So I had a lot of people that I could have interacted with at the time. And some days it was overwhelming because people wanted to input, and there's only so many people that you can, welcome into that space. I chose to be grateful for every single interaction, even if it was awkward and sometimes felt a little bit inappropriate. I was like, thank you, God, that person has chosen to reach out to me, and I'm sure they did it from the kindness of their heart. But what I loved the most was people that just sent a message that didn't require any kind of answer, any kind of feedback. Our tendency is to say, how are you doing? How are you coping? And you're requiring that person to try and put into words stuff that they probably don't. You could see them at 9 o'clock that morning and they could be doing, this is how they could be feeling. You could see them at 3 o'clock that afternoon. They might be feeling completely different. So even just sending a message saying, how are you doing? To me was like, oh, I don't know. I've got to try and find words for that. But if I received a message saying, woke up with you on my mind this morning, hope you're doing okay, or thinking about you, or just sending you lots of love, that kind of stuff was beautiful. You can just hit like, you can hit click, or if it catches you in the moment where you need to offload, then you, as the grieving person, you can then initiate the conversation and say, oh, do you know what, it's been really hard this morning. That message came at a good time because I'm really struggling this morning. Things like, oh, Christmas is coming up, oh, you must find Christmas difficult. I remember thinking, actually, Christmas was a beautiful time for me because it's when family gather and I didn't feel so isolated and alone. There were other more random points in the year that nobody else would have thought about that had a bigger impact on me. So that's a really, really good one. Like Emma said, I learnt second time round when Richard was going through his treatment because of feeling overwhelmed with Daniel. I created this I called it an inner circle. A handful of women, some family members, some friends that I really trusted. And we just had this email group, didn't we, back in 2014. And that was brilliant. And they were there during treatment, during the diagnosis, during the final days, and as Emma said, at the funeral. And there were a few times I would go to different social events in the few months after losing Richard. And bearing in mind, it was with him for 15 years, and then I'm suddenly doing stuff on my own. And not only that, but again, people come over, they want to ask the big questions. I would always have somebody ready with me as a wingman. I'd say, I want to go to the social event, can you stick with me? And there might be a look, or there might be a moment, and you need to interrupt that conversation, or you need to say, hey Esther, come and look at this. And that worked brilliantly for me, because otherwise I would feel too overwhelmed to go places. But knowing that somebody was there was just right. Gosh, I feel like there's way more that I could say. Please edit this out, Rachel, if it's too much. I think the last one is just share memories. I still love it today. We might be in the middle of a conversation about something else entirely, and somebody might just say to me, oh, I remember that time when Richard did such a thing and it was absolutely hilarious. And I'm like, oh, that's brilliant. So, as time goes on, you don't want the subject of your, you're the person that's really, really close to you. You don't want it to be a taboo thing. No. You want it to be as natural as, because if you think about it, if you're a married couple, you've been married for 20 years, all the time you go, oh, do you remember that time when we did such a thing 8 years ago? Or do you remember when the kids were little and we did blah, blah, blah? If the person's not there anymore, you think, is it all right for me to bring them up, or is it going to feel weird to everybody to go, oh yeah, me and Richard used to do that, or oh, I remember a time when Daniel did such a thing. If the other person makes it feel really natural, then it's fine. You just throw it in conversation, and it's not another loss on top of the loss. You can't even celebrate the memories, never mind, you know, not having the person right there with you as well. So yeah, many different things like that, I think, have really helped me with the grieving process, with moving forward, and not feeling like I had to tailor make my grief to anybody else's expectations.
That's massively helpful. No, what you said about just sending it, like, thinking of you, an emoji, like a heart emoji, something. That's a lot of people have said that. In fact, quite a few people since them losing someone recently, that it's just so much better to not have a question. Because sometimes when we ask, you know, when someone's ill and you ask them a question, are you feeling better today? It's partly for your own benefit. You want to know that you can stop worrying about them because they feel better, and the person feels pressured to say, yes, I'm a bit better today. So it's almost like, yeah, you don't need to worry about me anymore. So it's almost a bit needy to keep asking those questions for the person asking. And I can see why that is a massively good piece of advice. And in terms of sharing memories, I've only recently realised how important it is sending cards after somebody's died. I don't know whether I just didn't get that, or I don't know, maybe didn't know what to say. But I have tried to start writing a memory of the person more, rather than just sort of empty words or a Bible verse or whatever. I just thought, well, if I can put a memory in, that helps them if they're reading through it. And Rhiannon was telling me that one of the things when her dad died recently was that somebody reads through all of the cards, and the cards are stacked up at the funeral in Wales, and that seems to be the tradition, that you read everybody's card. So I realised that's a really big thing to get right because you kind of need to, and they probably don't want to give everyone the pressure of it, but to actually get that right and have it there as a memory and a permanent record for the person to keep reading over and over. So that seemed to be a lot bigger in some areas than others. I don't know, but I think now that we can just text, we sometimes forget that tradition is really important for lots of families.
Yeah, so my dad actually passed away in September 2020, and that was very sudden. And one of the overwhelmingly beautiful things about it, in the midst of all the other, you know, things, he was still working, he owned his own business, we had to deal with that, we had to help my mum, there was just so much to think about. I felt like we were flooded with different people saying, oh my goodness, your dad, this is what he did to my life. And there were whole chapters of stuff that I'd completely forgotten about. Like the time he was really good at giving people jobs, but people that just had gone through some like stuff sometimes of their own making, where they'd made a stupid decision, they were out of work, or you know, they'd had to step out of stuff that they were doing, and my dad would say, come and work for me for a few months, you know, like he gave them this grounding. And I was like, I totally forgotten that my dad used to do that. And it made this surreal moment of how can he not be here anymore. It was just cushioned in this, it was like wave after wave after wave of appreciation for who he was. And when it's written down, because your brain can only comprehend so much stuff in those early days where, you know, everything's just, you just feel stunned. You can always come back to that. And so we made sure we kept every single card. I actually compiled all the comments that came up, because, you know, digital age, you've got all these comments on his Facebook page, or whenever we put up a post, people would say, oh my goodness, your dad, da, 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 da. And I copied them all so that we could keep them and come back to them later. So whether it's anniversaries or just a bad day, you can go back and do that, and that is just beautiful. So I would definitely say, if you don't know what to say, just say, this is what I think of when I think of that person, and that will mean so much to the family that are left behind, because that's forever. You know, they've lost so much, but that memory, the impact that they've had on other people, that is forever.
Oh, that's fabulous.
And I would say keep sending those messages. So even now, in fact, it was last week, wasn't it, or earlier this week, I sent Esther a screenshot of something that came up on Facebook, where Esther had commented on my Facebook years ago, stop sending my husband funny messages, send it to me, I liked it. And so I sent that to Esther saying, what was the message? And we have no idea, but I'd obviously sent Richard something funny.
To me as well. I wanted to be.
I know, she was devastated because it wasn't. I hadn't sent it to her. And it will be, little things will come up, and so I will send a message about this kind of thing, or when I recently booked a second holiday for the year for me and my mum, I was like, can't believe I've done it. And Esther just replied with, what would Richard do? And that's what we had this, because Richard was so impulsive, wasn't he? If he thought, right, we're doing that, we're having that. When Richard died, I came home from being in Preston and bought a puppy on the way home. And then I was like, oh my goodness, I've bought a puppy. And Esther was like, what would Richard do? You know, saw a puppy he wanted, bought it. And so he lives on in those things, you know, however many years later, you do something impulsive, it's what would Richard do? Or that memory comes up and you know, Richard used to call me Seashell because my surname's Satchell, and Daniel, it was always Memma. So sometimes, you know, I'll just think about being Memma and Seashell, but it is sharing those memories, and it doesn't matter how many years ago these things happened. So cards at the time are brilliant, but then just send those texts. Do you remember when? Or, you know, this has just come to my mind, or this picture's flagged up on my Facebook, and keep sharing them. Yeah.
That's lovely. That's great advice. Right, I think we should leave it there for this episode. Is that all right? We've still got some questions we want to ask and quite a lot to talk about, but I know people have got things to come up with. You've got something on today, Esther. So I'm gonna finish it there, and we're gonna meet up again. Is that all right? Can we do that?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope everyone enjoys watching this video. Hope you don't cry like me. I know I was going to cry. I'm going to just stop recording in a second, but thank you to both of you for coming on. Thank you so much. We will meet up again and carry on with these questions another day. Okay. Have a good day. Bye. Bye.